It was a quiet Monday evening when the CEO of a massive corporation decided to do something no one would ever expect. Evelyn Carter, the woman at the helm of a billion-dollar company, had been hearing whispers for months, whispers that made her uneasy. People talked about corners being cut, rules being bent, and even some shady dealings happening behind closed doors. But every time she tried to dig deeper, the trail went cold. It seemed like everyone had their masks on during the day, playing nice in front of her while the real drama unfolded when she wasn't around. Evelyn wasn't someone who sat back and let things slide. She believed in leading by example, but this felt different. Something smelled fishy and she wanted to get to the bottom of it. So instead of calling yet another meeting or hiring another investigator, she came up with a plan so bold it could either save her company or blow up in her face. She decided to go undercover. The idea hit her late one night as she was leaving the office. She saw the cleaning crew hard at work, mopping floors, emptying trash bins, and wiping down desks. They moved silently through the building, almost invisible. No one paid them much attention. Employees walked past without a second glance. Managers stayed glued to their phones, and not a single person stopped to say thank you. That's when it clicked. If she wanted to see what really happened inside her company, she needed to become invisible too. With the help of her most trusted assistant, Evelyn transformed herself. Gone were her sharp suits and polished heels. In their place came plain clothes, a simple blue uniform, a pair of worn-out sneakers, and a cap pulled low over her face. She even swapped her designer glasses for a pair of cheap ones. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt nervous. What if someone figured out who she really was? What if things got worse than she imagined? Her assistant reassured her, reminding her that this was the only way to uncover the truth. Together, they created a fake identity. Evelyn became Maya, a temporary cleaner hired to fill in for the busy holiday season. Armed with a mop, a bucket, and a notebook tucked discreetly into her bag, Evelyn stepped into her new role. Walking into the office that first night felt surreal. The familiar hum of computers and ringing phones was replaced by silence, broken only by the occasional clatter of cleaning tools. Evelyn felt out of place, but determined. As she started her shift, she noticed how easy it was to blend in. No one looked twice at her. To them, she was just another face in the crowd, someone whose job was to clean up after them, not someone worth noticing. But Evelyn quickly realized that being invisible had its advantages. People spoke freely around her, assuming she wouldn't understand or care about what they were saying. She heard snippets of conversations, some harmless, others unsettling. One manager grumbled about how these people never did their jobs right, gesturing vaguely toward the cleaning staff. Another employee complained loudly about having to stay late, blaming everyone else for his workload. Evelyn listened intently, jotting down notes whenever she could. As the hours passed, she began to notice patterns. Trash cans overflowed because employees didn't bother to throw things away properly. Desks were left cluttered with papers and coffee cups, forcing cleaners to pick up the mess. Some workers treated the night crew with polite indifference, while others acted like they didn't exist at all. Evelyn's stomach churned as she realized how little respect many of her employees showed to those they considered beneath them. By the end of her first shift, Evelyn was exhausted, but more determined than ever. She hadn't uncovered any smoking guns yet, but she'd seen enough to know that something was off. This wasn't just about messy desks or rude comments. It was about a culture that allowed such behavior to thrive unchecked. And Evelyn knew that if she kept digging, she'd find the root of the problem. Whatever it took, she was ready to shine a light on the dark corners of her company and hold those responsible accountable. By her second night on the job, Evelyn, or Maya, as everyone now called her, was starting to get the hang of things. Mopping floors, dusting shelves, and emptying trash bins wasn't exactly glamorous work, but it gave her a front-row seat to the unfiltered reality of life inside her company after hours. The cleaning crew moved quietly through the building, blending into the background like ghosts. To most employees, they were invisible, just part of the scenery. But Evelyn was anything but invisible in her mind. Every observation, every comment, she overheard, added another piece to the puzzle she was trying to solve. That evening, the office wasn't completely deserted. A handful of employees lingered late, typing away at their computers or chatting near the coffee machine. Evelyn noticed how differently people acted when they thought no one important was watching. During the day, smiles were plastered on faces, and polite greetings filled the air. But at night, the masks came off. Conversations turned casual, and sometimes cruel. One incident stood out that night. As Evelyn pushed her cart down the hallway, she passed an open office door where a senior manager sat hunched over his desk. He glanced up briefly as she entered the room to empty the wastebasket, then muttered under his breath, "These cleaners never do their jobs right." Evelyn froze for a moment, her grip tightening on the trash bag. She had just mopped the floor outside his office less than 10 minutes earlier. His shoes had left muddy streaks all over her freshly cleaned tiles, yet here he was complaining about her performance. She bit back the urge to respond and simply nodded with a small smile before leaving the room. It wasn't easy to hold her tongue, but she reminded herself why she was there. This wasn't about proving him wrong, it was about understanding the bigger picture. Still, the comment stung. It made her wonder, if this is how they treat the cleaning staff, what else are they capable of? As she continued her rounds, Evelyn picked up on more troubling behavior. In the IT department, she found piles of papers scattered across desks instead of being tossed into recycling bins. Empty soda cans and food wrappers littered the area, forcing her to clean up after employees who couldn't be bothered to walk a few extra steps. One guy even dropped a crumpled candy wrapper on the floor right in front of her, expecting her to pick it up without saying a word. When she bent down to grab it, he didn't acknowledge her, not even a nod or a quick thanks. But it wasn't just laziness that bothered Evelyn. There was a deeper sense of disrespect lurking beneath the surface. Some employees spoke to the cleaning crew as though they weren't human beings. They barked orders, snapped fingers, or simply ignored them altogether. One woman walking past Evelyn bumped into her cart, sending a spray bottle clattering to the floor. Instead of apologizing, she rolled her eyes and muttered something about watching where you're going. Evelyn forced herself to stay calm, picking up the bottle with a quiet sigh. She knew reacting would blow her cover, but each interaction chipped away at her patience. Despite the negativity, not everyone treated the cleaners poorly. A young intern working late stopped to help Evelyn carry a heavy box of supplies to another floor. He smiled warmly and said, "You shouldn't have to lift all that by yourself." Another employee, a middle-aged man typing furiously at his laptop, paused long enough to thank her for tidying up his workspace. These small acts of kindness stood out like bright spots in an otherwise dim environment. They reminded Evelyn that not everyone in the company was blind to the efforts of others. As the night wore on, Evelyn began to see patterns emerge. Certain departments seemed worse than others. The marketing team, for instance, left their shared workspace in chaos, while the finance department kept things relatively neat. She also noticed cliques forming among employees. Some groups laughed and joked together, creating a lively atmosphere despite the late hour. Others worked in tense silence, occasionally exchanging sharp words or annoyed glances. Evelyn filed these observations away, knowing they might mean something later. Toward the end of her shift, Evelyn stumbled upon something odd in the break room. A group of 3 employees huddled around a table, speaking in hushed tones. At first glance, it looked innocent enough. A regular meeting between colleagues catching up on deadlines. But as Evelyn pretended to scrub the sink nearby, she caught fragments of their conversation. Words like "off the books" and "don't tell anyone" floated through the air. Her ears perked up immediately. Something about their tone felt off. When the trio finally dispersed, Evelyn lingered in the break room pretending to organize the cleaning supplies. That's when she spotted it. A crumpled receipt lying on the floor near the trash can. Picking it up casually, she smoothed it out and froze. It was for an expensive dinner at a high-end restaurant charged to the company account. Scribbled on the back were notes about a potential client deal. Evelyn's stomach tightened. This wasn't just sloppy record-keeping. It smelled like corruption. Forcing herself to stay calm, Evelyn slipped the receipt into her pocket and finished her shift. On her way home that night, her mind raced with questions. Who were those employees? What kind of deals were they making, behind closed doors? And how deep did this rabbit hole go? Evelyn knew she was onto something big, but she also knew she couldn't jump to conclusions. For now, she had to keep her head down, gather more evidence, and wait for the right moment to strike. By her third night undercover, Evelyn, or Maya as she was known to everyone else, was beginning to feel like a detective in one of those crime dramas she sometimes watched late at night. Every trash can she emptied felt like opening a clue box. Every whispered conversation an opportunity to uncover something big. She had already seen enough to know that her company's problems ran deeper than messy desks or rude comments. But on this particular evening, she stumbled upon something that made her blood run cold. It started innocently enough. Evelyn was assigned to clean the IT department again, a part of the office that always seemed messier than the rest. Papers were scattered everywhere, cables tangled like spaghetti, and sticky coffee rings stained nearly every surface. As she worked her way through the clutter, she noticed a printer jammed with half-printed documents. Normally she would have just cleared the jam and moved on, but something about the papers caught her eye. They weren't regular memos or meeting notes. They looked official, almost confidential. Curiosity got the better of her. While pretending to tidy up nearby desks, Evelyn glanced at the stack of discarded pages. Her heart sank as she realized what she was looking at. Emails detailing sensitive client information being shared with people outside the company. There were names, account numbers, and even internal strategies meant to stay private. Someone had been printing these out and then tossing them aside like yesterday's news. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the pile. It wasn't just the breach of confidentiality that shocked her. It was the casualness with which it was done. Whoever had printed these documents didn't seem to care about the risks. If this information fell into the wrong hands, it could ruin relationships, damage reputations, and cost the company millions. And yet here it was, crumpled up and left for anyone to find. But that wasn't all. Beneath the stack of emails, Evelyn discovered something even more alarming: receipts. Dozens of them, stapled together with handwritten notes scribbled in the margins. At first glance, they looked harmless. Dinners at fancy restaurants, bottles of expensive wine, hotel stays. But the details told a different story. These weren't ordinary expenses. They were bribes, thinly disguised as business costs. One receipt included a note saying, "Make sure client X signs by Friday," while another simply read, "Keep him happy." Evelyn felt sick to her stomach. This wasn't just unethical behavior, it was illegal. She knew she couldn't take the documents with her without raising suspicion, so she memorized key details instead. The dates, the amounts, the names. They burned themselves into her memory like brands. Pretending nothing was wrong, she finished cleaning the area and moved on to the next task. But inside, her mind was racing. Who was behind this? How high up did it go? And how long had it been going on? Later that night, as Evelyn emptied the trash bins in the break room, she overheard another conversation that sent chills down her spine. Two employees stood near the vending machine, speaking in low voices. From their tone, it was clear they thought no one was listening. "Did you hear?" one of them said. "They're planning to sabotage the competition next week. Some fake rumors online that'll teach them to undercut us." The other person chuckled darkly. "Good. About time we showed them who's boss. Let's see how they handle bad press." Evelyn froze mid-scoop, her trash bag dangling limply in her hand. Sabotaging a competitor, spreading false rumors. This wasn't just dirty business tactics, it was corporate warfare. She wanted to confront them right then and there, demand answers, and put an end to whatever scheme they were cooking up. But she reminded herself why she was doing this: to gather proof, not to blow her cover prematurely. Forcing herself to stay calm, she finished emptying the bin and walked away as if nothing had happened. As the hours dragged on, Evelyn found herself replaying everything she'd seen and heard that night. The stolen client data, The bribes, the talk of sabotage. It all pointed to a pattern of corruption that went far beyond lazy employees or disrespectful attitudes. Someone in the company was orchestrating this, pulling strings from the shadows. Evelyn couldn't help but wonder how many others were involved, or complicit in staying silent. Despite the weight of her discoveries, Evelyn refused to let despair take over. Instead, she focused on the small victories she'd witnessed that night. Earlier, a young woman working late had smiled warmly and thanked Evelyn for cleaning her desk. "You guys work so hard," she'd said. "We don't say it enough, but we appreciate it." Moments like that reminded Evelyn that not everyone in the company was rotten. There were still good people trying to do the right thing, even if they didn't realize how much courage it took to stand apart from the crowd. By the time her shift ended, Evelyn's legs ached from standing all night, and her mind buzzed with unanswered questions. She stepped out into the cool night air, clutching her mop bucket tightly as she tried to process everything she'd uncovered. This wasn't just about fixing a few broken processes or calling out rude behavior anymore. This was about dismantling a culture of greed and deceit that had taken root in her company and holding those responsible accountable. As she walked to her car, Evelyn allowed herself a small smile. She may have started this journey feeling powerless, but now she knew exactly what she was fighting against. Whatever came next, she was ready. After all, the truth was on her side, and she wasn't about to let anyone stand in her way. By her fourth night undercover, Evelyn, or Maya, as she was still known to everyone, was starting to feel like she had two lives. During the on-day day, she was the polished CEO, attending meetings, signing documents, and making big decisions that shaped the future of her company. But at night, she transformed into an invisible cleaner, navigating the shadows of her own workplace and uncovering secrets that would make her blood boil. The contrast between these two worlds was staggering, but it only fueled her determination to dig deeper. That evening, Evelyn decided to push her investigation further. She couldn't just rely on scraps of paper or overheard conversations anymore. She needed to connect the dots. And what better way to do that than by talking to people? Of course, she couldn't exactly waltz up to someone and start grilling them about bribery or sabotage. Instead, she used her position as a lowly cleaner to her advantage. People often underestimated those they considered beneath them, and Evelyn planned to use that to her benefit. As she worked her way through the office, mopping floors and wiping down desks, she struck up casual conversations with employees who stayed late. Some ignored her completely, too absorbed in their phones or laptops to even notice she was there. Others gave her curt nods or muttered quick thanks before returning to their tasks. But a surprising number were happy to chat, especially when they thought she wasn't paying attention to anything important. One such employee was a junior executive, a cocky young man with slicked-back hair and an expensive watch that screamed, "Trying too hard." He sat at his desk, scrolling through emails while Evelyn cleaned nearby. Sensing an opportunity, she casually asked, "Busy night?" He glanced up briefly, then smirked. "Yeah, you could say that. I'm finalizing some expense reports for my boss. You wouldn't believe how much stuff we can write off." Evelyn raised an eyebrow, feigning curiosity. "Oh yeah? Like what?" The young man leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the chance to brag. "Oh, dinners, travel, gifts. Basically anything I want, as long as I phrase it right. Last month, I charged a weekend getaway to a resort because I told my boss it was client entertainment. He didn't ask questions. He never does." Evelyn's stomach churned, but she kept her expression neutral. "Sounds pretty sweet," she said lightly, pretending to admire his cleverness. Inside, she was seething. This wasn't just bending the rules, it was outright fraud. Another conversation took place in the break room, where a group of mid-level managers gathered around the coffee machine. Evelyn lingered nearby, pretending to organize supplies while listening intently. One of them joked about falsifying numbers in a recent report, saying, "If anyone asks, those sales figures are legit. Who's going to check anyway?" The others laughed nervously, though one woman looked uncomfortable and quickly changed the subject. What struck Evelyn most during these exchanges wasn't just the content. It was the tone. These employees weren't whispering conspiratorially. or acting guilty. They spoke openly, almost proudly about their unethical behavior, confident that no one would care. It was as if breaking the rules had become normalized, accepted as part of the culture. Evelyn realized this wasn't just about individual bad actors, it was systemic. Somewhere along the line, accountability had been replaced by apathy. But not everyone fit this mold. As Evelyn continued her rounds, she encountered a few employees who stood out for all the right reasons. One was a middle-aged man working quietly, at his desk, surrounded by stacks of neatly organized papers. When Evelyn approached to empty his trash bin, he smiled warmly and said, "Thanks for coming by. I try to keep things tidy, but sometimes it gets overwhelming." She nodded, sensing an opening. "Long hours, huh?" He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Yeah, been here since 7 this morning. But hey, someone's got to do the work, right? Not everyone around here feels that way, though." His words intrigued Evelyn. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, glancing around to... By the 5th night of her undercover mission, Evelyn, or Maya, as she was still known to everyone, was starting to feel like she was living in 2 different worlds. During the day, she sat in boardrooms making big decisions, while at UO night, she scrubbed floors and listened to conversations that painted a very different picture of her company. The deeper she went, the more she realized how much work lay ahead, not just to fix the problems, but to rebuild trust and integrity from the ground up. That evening, Evelyn walked into the office feeling a mix of determination and dread. She had already uncovered enough to know that corruption wasn't limited to one department or a handful of employees. It was everywhere. But something about tonight felt heavier, like the air was charged with tension. Maybe it was because she'd started piecing things together, connecting dots that others might have missed. Or maybe it was because she knew she couldn't stay invisible forever. Sooner or later, she'd have to confront what she'd discovered, and the people responsible. As she worked her way through the building, Evelyn noticed a group of employees huddled near the coffee machine in the IT department. At first glance, they looked harmless enough, just coworkers catching up after a long day. But as Evelyn moved closer to clean the area, she overheard snippets of their conversation. They weren't talking about deadlines or projects. They were plotting something far more sinister. "Did you see the latest post?" one of them asked, smirking. "Our little campaign is working wonders." Another chimed in, laughing. "Yeah. Can't believe how gullible people are. A few fake reviews online and suddenly everyone thinks our competitor is falling apart." Classic. Evelyn's stomach sank. Fake reviews? Online campaigns? This wasn't just unethical. It was sabotage. Someone in her company was deliberately spreading lies about a rival business to gain an unfair advantage. And judging by the casual tone of their conversation, they didn't think twice about the consequences. Not for the competitors, not for the customers, and certainly not for themselves. But the worst part came next. One of the group members leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "Just make sure no one traces it back to us. We don't need another scandal on top of everything else." Evelyn froze mid-sweep, her broom hovering inches above the floor. Scandal? What scandal? Her mind raced as she tried to piece together what he meant. Had there been other incidents she hadn't uncovered yet? Was this just the tip of the iceberg? She forced herself to keep moving, pretending not to hear anything unusual. But inside, her heart was pounding. Every new discovery made her angrier, and more resolved to take action. Yet she reminded herself that blowing her cover now would only make things worse. She needed proof, solid evidence she could use to hold people accountable. For now, she had to stay patient, even if it killed her. Later that night, Evelyn found herself in the finance department, emptying trash bins and wiping down desks. It was always messier here than anywhere else, with crumpled papers and discarded, sticky notes littering the floor. As she bent down to pick up a stray receipt, something caught her eye. A handwritten note scribbled in the corner. It read, "Expense report approved. Don't ask questions." Beneath it was a list of charges that included luxury hotel stays, designer gifts, and expensive meals. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she tucked the receipt into her pocket. This wasn't just carelessness. It was deliberate manipulation of company funds. Someone high up was signing off on these expenses without batting an eyelid. And based on what she'd seen so far, it was clear that accountability had gone out the window. But the most gut-wrenching moment of the night came when Evelyn overheard a group of employees mocking a colleague who had recently reported harassment. She was passing by the break room when she heard laughter erupt from inside. Peering through the doorway, she saw three men joking around, clearly amused by something. "Can you believe she actually filed a complaint?" one of them said, rolling his eyes. "What a drama queen." "She should have kept her mouth shut," another added. "Now HR's breathing down everyone's necks." The third man snorted. "Serves her right for causing trouble. If she wanted to play nice, she wouldn't be in this mess." Evelyn felt sick to her stomach. Here was someone brave enough to speak up about being mistreated, and instead of support, she got ridicule and blame. Worse still, none of the men seemed to realize, or care how wrong they were. To them, reporting harassment wasn't a cry for help. It was an inconvenience, a disruption to their comfortable routines. Unable to listen any longer, Evelyn stepped into the break room under the pretense of cleaning. She grabbed a rag and began wiping down the counters, her movements sharp and deliberate. The men barely glanced at her, too wrapped up in their own cruel banter to notice. But Evelyn made sure to memorize their faces. She wouldn't forget them anytime soon. As the night wore on, Evelyn found moments of hope amid the darkness. In the marketing department, she encountered a young intern who smiled warmly and thanked her for tidying up his workspace. "You guys work so hard," he said sincerely. "We don't say it enough, but we really appreciate it." His words touched Evelyn deeply. Here was someone who understood the value of kindness, even in small gestures. She nodded gratefully, filing his face away as someone worth remembering, and perhaps rewarding later. By the time her shift ended, Evelyn was physically and emotionally exhausted. Walking to her car, she replayed everything she'd seen and heard that night. The sabotage, the bribery, the mockery, it all pointed to a culture that prioritized greed and selfishness over ethics and respect. But amidst the chaos, she'd also seen glimmers of humanity. The honest workers, the quiet rebels, the ones who refused to conform to the toxic norm. As she drove home, Evelyn allowed herself a moment of reflection. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Fixing a broken system required more than firing a few bad apples. It meant rebuilding trust, fostering accountability, and creating a workplace where everyone felt valued. But despite the challenges, she felt a spark of hope. Whatever happened next, she was ready to fight, for her company, for its employees, and for the values she believed in. By the sixth night of her undercover mission, Evelyn, or Maya, as she was still known to everyone, was running out of patience. She had gathered enough evidence to paint a grim picture of what was happening inside her company. Corruption, deceit, and disrespect were everywhere, woven into the fabric of daily life. But now it was time to start confronting the truth head-on. Keeping her cover had been critical up until this point, but Evelyn knew she couldn't stay invisible forever. If she wanted real change, she needed to act. And soon. That evening, Evelyn walked into the office carrying her usual mop and bucket. But this time there was a fire in her eyes. She wasn't just here to clean or observe anymore. She was here to test loyalty, challenge behavior, and see who would crumble under pressure. The thought scared her a little. What if someone recognized her? What if her plan backfired? But fear wasn't going to stop her. This was her company, and she owed it to herself and her employees to set things right. Her first target was a mid-level manager who had consistently treated the cleaning staff with disdain. Over the past few nights, Evelyn had noticed how he never acknowledged their presence, let alone thanked them for their work. Instead, he acted like they didn't exist, tossing trash onto the floor and expecting them to pick it up without complaint. Tonight, Evelyn decided to push him a little further. As she entered his office to empty the wastebasket, she noticed a coffee cup sitting on the edge of his desk. It teetered precariously, spilling drops onto her freshly mopped floor. Without saying a word, Evelyn picked up the cup and placed it firmly in the trash. Then, pretending to be curious, she asked, "Why do you always leave things lying around?" The man looked up, clearly annoyed at being interrupted. "What's it to you?" he snapped. "Just do your job and leave me alone." Evelyn forced a smile, keeping her tone light. "I'm just trying to understand why people don't bother cleaning up after themselves. Makes my job harder, you know." He rolled his eyes and muttered something about cleaners being paid to deal with messes. Evelyn felt her blood boil, but she kept her cool. "Fair enough," she said casually. "But if I were you, I'd think twice about how I treat others. You never know when karma might come knocking." The comment seemed to catch him off guard. He stared at her for a moment, then shook his head and went back to typing on his laptop. Evelyn smiled inwardly. Maybe he hadn't understood her veiled threat, but she had planted a seed of doubt in his mind. That was progress. Later that night, Evelyn encountered another employee, a junior executive who had bragged to her earlier about falsifying expense reports. He sat at his desk, scrolling through emails while sipping from a can of soda. Sensing an opportunity, Evelyn approached him with a cart full of cleaning supplies. "Busy night?" she asked, feigning curiosity. He glanced up briefly, then smirked. "Yeah, just finalizing some numbers for my boss. Nothing too exciting." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Numbers, huh? Sounds complicated." "It's all about phrasing things the right way," he said smugly. "As long as it looks legit, no one asks questions." This time Evelyn didn't bother, hiding her disgust. "And what happens if someone does ask questions?" she pressed. "Won't they figure it out eventually?" The man laughed nervously. "Nah, trust me, they won't. My boss..." The seventh night of Evelyn's undercover journey was unlike any other. She had spent days gathering evidence, confronting behaviors, and planting seeds of doubt in the minds of those who thought they were untouchable. But now it was time to step out of the shadows and reclaim her role as the CEO. Evelyn, or Maya, as she'd been known to everyone, was done playing the part of an invisible cleaner. It was time to reveal herself and hold people accountable for their actions. That evening, Evelyn walked into the office with a strange mix of nerves and determination. This wasn't just another shift. It was the moment she had been building toward. She carried her mop and bucket like usual, but there was something different about her posture, her shoulders squared, her steps confident. The disguise that had hidden her identity for so long suddenly felt like a costume she couldn't wait to shed. Her first move was deliberate. She headed straight for the IT department, where she had uncovered some of the most damning evidence. Confidential client data printed carelessly and left lying around, along with receipts for bribes disguised as legitimate expenses. As she entered the room, she spotted a senior manager sitting at his desk, scrolling through emails on his phone. He barely glanced up when she approached. "Excuse me," Evelyn said, her voice calm but firm. "Can I ask you something?" The man sighed, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "What is it?" he asked, not bothering to look up. Evelyn set down her mop and leaned slightly against his desk, making sure he finally met her gaze. Then, without hesitation, she pulled off her cap and removed her glasses, revealing her true face. For a split second, the man froze, his mouth hanging open in shock. "Do you recognize me now?" Evelyn asked, her tone icy. "Because I definitely recognize you." The color drained from his face as realization hit him. You're, he stammered, unable to finish his sentence. "Yes," Evelyn said sharply. "I'm your CEO, and I've seen enough to know exactly what you've been doing here." The man sputtered, trying to defend himself, but Evelyn cut him off. "Let's start with the confidential documents you threw in the trash like they were worthless. Or how about the bribes you disguised as business expenses? Did you really think no one would find out?" He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Instead, he sank back into his chair, looking defeated. Evelyn didn't give him a chance to recover. She handed him a folder filled with copies of the evidence she had collected, emails, receipts, notes, and told him to expect a formal investigation. Then she turned and walked away, leaving him to process what had just happened. Next, Evelyn made her way to the finance department, where she confronted another offender. This time, it was a junior executive who had bragged to her about falsifying expense reports. When she stepped into his workspace and revealed her true identity, his reaction was priceless. His jaw dropped, and his hands trembled as he frantically tried to gather papers scattered across his desk. You can't be serious," he stuttered, panic rising in his voice. "Oh, I'm very serious," Evelyn replied, her expression cold. "You've been gaming the system for months thinking no one would notice. Well, guess what? Someone did, and now you'll have to answer for it." She didn't mince words. Every confrontation was direct, every accusation backed by solid evidence. Some employees tried to deny their involvement, while others broke down under the weight of guilt. A few even attempted to plead ignorance, claiming they were just following orders. But Evelyn wasn't interested in excuses. She wanted accountability, and she wasn't going to settle for anything less. By the end of the night, word had spread quickly through the office. Whispers echoed in hallways as employees realized that the quiet, unassuming cleaner they had ignored or disrespected was actually their boss. For some, it was embarrassing. For others, it was terrifying. But for everyone, it was a wake-up call. The next morning, Evelyn called an emergency company-wide meeting. Dressed in her signature power suit, she stood at the front of the packed conference room, her presence commanding attention. The atmosphere was tense. Employees shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure of what was coming next. "I want to talk about integrity," Evelyn began, her voice steady but laced with authority. "Over the past few weeks, I've seen firsthand how some of you conduct yourselves when you think no one is watching. What I discovered was disappointing, to say the least. Corruption, dishonesty, disrespect. These are not values we tolerate in this organization." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "Some of you may already know this, but for those who don't, I went undercover as a cleaner to understand what's really happening in our company. What I found confirmed my worst fears. There are individuals among us who have abused their positions, manipulated systems, and treated others with contempt. Those responsible will face consequences. Not tomorrow, not next week, but today." A murmur rippled through the crowd, but Evelyn raised her hand to silence them. "This isn't just about punishing bad behavior," she added. "It's about rebuilding trust. From this point forward, we will operate with transparency, respect, and accountability. Anyone caught violating these principles will be dealt with swiftly and decisively." To drive her point home, Evelyn announced sweeping changes. Several high-ranking executives involved in illegal activities were fired immediately. Mandatory ethics training sessions were introduced for all employees, and anonymous reporting systems were put in place to encourage whistleblowers to come forward safely. Most importantly, Evelyn promoted individuals who had shown kindness and integrity during her time undercover, rewarding their honesty and dedication. As the meeting wrapped up, Evelyn addressed the room one last time. "Change starts with each of you," she said firmly. "We can either continue down this path of greed and selfishness, or we can choose to do better. For ourselves, for our colleagues, and for the future of this company. The choice is yours." Walking out of the conference room, Evelyn felt a mix of relief and resolve. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she knew she had taken the first crucial steps toward fixing what was broken. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them head-on. After all, she hadn't fought this hard to give up now, Indu. The weeks that followed her dramatic revelation, Evelyn found herself reflecting deeply on everything she had uncovered, and everything she had learned. Her decision to go undercover as a cleaner had been bold, risky, and at times emotionally draining. But it had also been one of the most eye-opening experiences of her life. What started as a mission to root out corruption turned into a journey of self-discovery, forcing her to confront not just the flaws in her company but the gaps in her own leadership. At first, the fallout from her investigation felt overwhelming. The firings of several high-ranking executives sent shockwaves through the organization. Some employees were angry, accusing Evelyn of overreacting or playing favorites. Others were scared, worried about whether they might be next on the chopping block. But amidst the chaos, there was also a sense of relief. For many, it was validation, that someone finally cared enough to take action. And for those who had quietly suffered under the toxic culture, it was a chance to breathe again, to feel like their voices mattered. Evelyn didn't stop at firing offenders. She worked tirelessly to rebuild trust within the company. She introduced new policies designed to foster accountability and respect. Anonymous reporting systems allowed employees to flag unethical behavior without fear of retaliation. Regular town hall meetings gave everyone a platform to voice concerns directly to leadership. And perhaps most importantly, Evelyn made it clear that integrity wasn't optional, it was non-negotiable. But change didn't happen overnight. There were days when Evelyn doubted herself, wondering if she'd done the right thing. Would people resent her for exposing their secrets? Had she gone too far by dismantling entire departments? These questions haunted her late at night, but every morning she reminded herself why she had started this journey in the first place. To create a workplace where honesty and hard work were rewarded, not overshadowed by greed and deceit. 1. Of the biggest surprises came from the cleaning crew, the very people Evelyn had joined during her undercover stint. When she revealed her true identity to them, they were shocked but incredibly supportive. One of the older cleaners pulled her aside after a shift and said, "You didn't have to do what you did, but we're glad you did. Nobody ever listens to us. But you proved that even the quietest voices matter." His words stayed with Evelyn long after their conversation ended. It wasn't just about fixing broken systems or punishing bad actors. It was about recognizing the humanity in every role, no matter how small or overlooked. From that day forward, she made it a priority to ensure that the cleaning staff and all support teams were treated with the dignity and respect they deserved. Small gestures, like providing better equipment and scheduling regular check-ins, went a long way in showing appreciation. As the months passed, the ripple effects of Evelyn's actions became impossible to ignore. Morale improved across the board. Employees who had once kept their heads down out of fear began speaking up more openly, sharing ideas and collaborating in ways they never had before. Teams started working together instead of against each other, driven by a renewed sense of purpose. Even clients noticed the difference, praising